Welcome to Santa's MLS Tech Workshops, where we'll be going over ways on how to better your business. In this tutorial, Erin Dickinson from InfoSparks will be going over how to look at MLS-wide stats and how to compare different area data.
So now you should be seeing InfoSparks. So when we clicked on that InfoSparks icon, this is what we'll see. And so with the InfoSparks tool, we have the ability to slice and dice the housing market up into a bunch of different segments. And like I like to say, you can peel back the different layers of the real estate onion. When it comes to what's going on with real estate, it's all local, it's all relative. Different segments of the market perform differently. And so with this tool, we can look at the MLS wide stats, but we can also narrow down into a more hyper focus and look at something more specific. And so when you launch InfoSparks, oftentimes you're going to be starting from this big picture view here. And so from here, I'm looking at stats for the entire MLS. And I can look at the median sales price, which is the default view. There's a bunch of other metrics down here as well that I can look at. But I want to show you some of the customization features of the tool first before we go any further. So in the upper left-hand corner is our area picker. And if I click on that, I can scroll through a list of available areas, or I can filter by different area types, or I can just simply start typing in the box here as well. And so I can pick an area that I want. And once I've picked that local area, you can see how those stats have been updated. And so now I'm looking at just the sales that happened in this local area. And there's additional things here that I can do to filter these results. So by default here, we're looking at both the single family and condo segments. But if I wanted to look at one or the other, I could simply unselect the one that I don't want to look at. We can also filter based off of price range, land tenure, bedrooms, bathrooms, square footage, development status, as well as zoning. And so we can come in here, for example, and say, I want to look at just the condos and townhouses, and I want to look at just fee simple and just 2 bedrooms. And so as you saw, as I was making those different selections here, you were seeing that the chart below is being updated automatically as we're going. And so that makes it a very easy way for us here to get instant feedback on what we're looking at. Now, InfoSparks is extremely powerful in the ability to really narrow down a list of properties to what could be potentially 0 properties like this. And so something where you have very little stats, let's do, so for example, here we've got no data, or if we have very little data, the charts will look pretty volatile. And so what that's telling you is that you've created such a small sample size, there's not a lot of good data to pull off of that. And so this will frequently happen if you've applied quite a few filters at the top, or if you've applied a sequence of filters that just doesn't exist in real life, or if you, when you're pulling up a geography, if you've pulled up, instead of a neighborhood or an entire area, if you've pulled up a specific building, some buildings just simply don't have a lot of sales in them. And so therefore, you're going to get a very limited list of results to run stats on. So for example, here we see how there's some pretty strong price volatility here. And that's simply because when the sample size is small, it's easy for a single sale to make a fairly substantial difference on that activity. But regardless, even though we do have a volatility, we still see a trend here over time of prices appreciating. Now, if there are situations where you really do want to get very specific and you're finding, there may only be a couple of points that show on this chart. In some cases, it is still best to just flip back into the MLS and do an MLS search and pull comps the old-fashioned way here, and where you can look at very specific properties and makes very specific adjustments. So with InfoSparks, we do need to be a little bit broader in how we define things because we're looking for trends as opposed to pricing 5,000 up or down on a specific property, that you'd probably still want to go back and rely on your CMA style techniques. So we can filter by all of these different items. We can also compare multiple area or multiple filters at once. So for example, um, if we wanted to look at everything that was one bedroom or fewer and two bedrooms, by clicking on the plus button next to the additional filter, we're including that in the search, and you can see how that can make an adjustment to the stats. Otherwise, we can hit the split button here, and when we hit split, now we're actually comparing and contrasting those two segments. And so here we're seeing the differences in price by one bedroom or fewer and two bedroom units. The other thing we can do is we can come in here and we can customize our square footage ranges or our price ranges. So if I hit the custom button, I can either edit the existing ranges or create my own. And once I've created my own ranges, then I can compare any of that data looking at those filters depending on what I've set for that area. So with the customization there, you can create your own ranges again for square footages as well as for price range. The other thing we can do is we can compare multiple areas together. And so we can use the Add an Area tab here at the top and add up to 3 additional areas to compare against. And we would just simply come into each one of these tabs and choose an area that we're looking for. And from here now we've got 4 different areas we can compare. Now when you do this, you can create situation here where you end up with charts that are fairly noisy or fairly active. For example, this. There's a lot going on here. Looking at the stats for entire MLS and Honolulu County, those are very tight together because Honolulu County is the majority of the sales. And so those lines blend together. The other ones are fairly volatile. While you can compare 4 areas at a time, my suggestion would be to compare one area to another, just to keep things more simplified. And so here we're just looking at 2 areas, and it's, I think, a lot easier to interpret. The other thing to keep in mind when working with multiple areas is that whichever tab is active, the filters that are applied in that tab are what are being displayed in the results below. So when I added a new area, I start off with the default set of filters, which just are the 2 property type filters. Everything else is set to all. And so if I wanted to look at something more specific, for example, looking at just the leasehold properties, I can apply that filter here, or I can go back to the original tab. And by clicking on the original tab, I can get the list of filters that I had previously applied there. So just keep that in mind, whichever tab is active, those are the filters that are being applied to the charts that you're seeing below.